Thank you, Darren. So my name is Rohit Mital. I'm from SGT. And what I wanted to talk to you today about was some of the experiences that SGT, have experienced in building what I call an agile knowledge environment. So before I get into the actual presentation itself, I wanted to talk just this one slide about SGT. And the reason I want to do that is because when you look at knowledge management, when you look at what about the knowledge management, what is it you're trying to capture, we look at how you're trying to capture it and why you're trying to capture the knowledge, I think it's important to keep in mind that it varies depending on the type of organization you are and what the mission of the organization is. So SGT is a federal service provider. So as a federal service provider, what we care about is looking at best practices from our past engagements that we work with our customers, looking at current engagements that we have with the customers, and how do we share these best practices across the current engagements as well as go after future engagements. And this was a few years ago. I was talking with Dr. Cam Gafarian, who's a co-founder and CEO of SGT. He was talking about the early days when they were the two guys in a garage. And when they used to go out and meet with their customers there, they used to carry around the folder. And in that folder, they had information about their current engagements and the past engagements. That was SGT's first knowledge management systems. And so over the years, as SGT has grown, we have continually assessed what we use for knowledge management systems, keeping in mind what are the new technologies out there we can use so they can encourage more acquisition and more sharing of the knowledge using these net technologies. So about 18 months ago, I was tasked with looking at, how do we specifically capture technical knowledge that is going across all the different engagements there. That is something at SGT we were not doing very well. We did have a corporate enterprise-wide knowledge sharing system, but we did not have anything that would allow us to specifically capture the technical knowledge that existed across the current engagements. So really what this presentation is about is my experiences in trying to create the knowledge environment to very specifically address that. How do I capture what I call implicit knowledge across the different engagements that exist across SGT? Oops, sorry, I was supposed to be on this slide. This is what I was talking about, apologize. So this was really the first slide is referred about what is SGT, what's the reason I was looking at knowledge environments, and what am I trying to do out there. So I tried to go around, trying to figure out what I wanted to capture. I wanted to just have one slide about what are the different kinds of knowledge. So if you look around the literature on the web, if you look at what the analysts say and what the industry is talking about, there's essentially two types of knowledges, right? You have implicit knowledge and you have explicit knowledge. And the third category out here called culture knowledge, and I'll talk about that when I get to it later on out here. So I was trying to understand, how do I describe to somebody the implicit knowledge and the explicit knowledge? And so this is the example I came up with. So I'm a father of 6 children, and I've spent a lot of summers trying to teach my kids how to ride a bike. So we look at about riding a bike, right? You have about how to use the pedals on a bike, how to use brakes on a bike. That's an example of explicit knowledge. It is knowledge that can be articulated and communicated using a very formal, systematic language. You can communicate explicit knowledge using documents, Word documents, PDF files, photographs, videos. It's information that can be persisted in a repository and can be shared and communicated with a lot of other people. Now, going back to the bike example, one of the challenges I had was, how do the kids keep their balance on the bikes? I tried a lot of ways to explain that to them. That is an example of what we call implicit knowledge. It is knowledge that is embedded in someone's personal experiences and individual's personal experiences, and usually expressed in the form of judgment or skills or expertise. And it's usually it is obtained through personal experiences, practical experience of that person. It is very hard to communicate this implicit knowledge, to share this implicit knowledge. A lot of times, the only way you can do that is through personal interactions and frequent interactions you have with the people. And it is implicit knowledge that I was focused on as creating the agile knowledge environment. How do we get knowledge out of the people's heads and get them in environments that can be reused across our company to do that? So there's a common saying in the industry. One is, you know more than what you can say, and you say more than what you can write. And that whole knowing to write is the explicit knowledge. How much you know and what you can say is what we call part of the implicit knowledge. Now, the third category here was cultural knowledge, and that has an impact on implicit and explicit knowledge. So when you think about cultural knowledge, it's really the norms, the values, the rituals that you may have within an organization. But if you look at these norms and values, and if you look at organizations that focus more on conformity versus originality, then you have a negative knowledge sharing environment to do that. On the other hand, if you have examples of organizations like startup companies where they're innovative in nature, you have a lot of implicit knowledge that is being shared around within that organization. So at SGT, we're fortunate to have somebody who's the co-founder of the company who still hasn't lost his zest for innovation and creativity. And part of the experiment here was to go ahead and try to use creative ways in which we can capture knowledge within an organization. So when I talked about Agile as applied to knowledge management, what I was referring to is really the principles and the best practices that come out using Agile methodologies of software development. I'm sure a number of people out here, you have used Agile methodologies in software development. So the presentation is not going to be about Agile methodologies or about how it's being used in software development. What really fascinated me as someone who's a practitioner of using Agile methodologies, specifically Agile Scrum for software development, is the huge amount of knowledge sharing that goes on when you use Agile Scrum. So if you think about Agile Scrum, right, you have 2 to 4 week sprint cycles. And at the end of the sprint cycles, you actually create working software to do that. Now, in these 2 to 4 week sprint cycles, what you go to is you create cross-functional teams. The teams were made up of developers, the testers, database administrators, security engineers. These people are communicating with each other all the time. There is knowledge sharing going on. When you go out building the product, you go have a sprint planning session. In that case, you bring the product owners into your planning cycle. This is where, again, knowledge is transferred. Business knowledge getting transferred to developers. The developers sharing about how requirements are set up with the business. Knowledge transfer is occurring during that process. If you think about the daily scrum that occurs during the sprint cycle, every day you have a stand-up meeting for 15 minutes there. A lot of implicit knowledge is being shared during the process of doing these daily stand-ups. And then finally, when you do the sprint retrospectives and you do reviews out there, you're sharing about what worked, what did not work, as you went through the process of using Agile development for doing software development. So I looked at this and said, there's so much knowledge sharing that goes on during this using Agile methodologies. Is there something there that I can use when I'm trying to create a knowledge environment within my enterprise? And this is really what we're going to be talking about. So those of you who have used Agile for software development probably have known about what they call the Agile Manifesto, which I've shown on this side of the page, my right-hand side. So part of the Agile Manifesto is they create a set of values that you use in order to do Agile software development. So I said, can I take the liberty of creating an analogous Agile Manifesto for what I call knowledge environment, for creating a knowledge environment. And those are the ones that are listed on the left-hand side, on my left-hand side. Now, when you look at these values, let's take one example, right? We're going to take the one about working software over comprehensive documentation. That's number 2. So when I say working software over comprehensive documentation, it's not about a choice. I'm not saying that I will choose working software over comprehensive documentation. What I'm saying is I'll make the priority of making working software a higher priority than comprehensive documentation. So when I look at the manifesto for knowledge management, you see the words one over the other. It's not a choice, but it's really about prioritizing one over the other. So I'm going to quickly walk through these 3 manifestos you have. The first one was about people over tools there. This seems like an obvious thing. You read about it all the time in literature. It says people are the greatest assets of an organization. When I saw Cora's presentations doing earlier in a cultural slide, she actually had that at the bottom, people are the greatest assets in an organization. So you look at this Agile Manifesto, the idea here was if I'm trying to capture implicit knowledge, going back to the Agile Scrum, with a lot of implicit knowledge being captured, it's all about people. It's the interactions among the people that go around there. It's the face-to-face communication that happens there. And that's what the manifesto says. People are more important than the tool itself that you're trying to bring into the organization. The second one it talked about is good enough over perfect content. What I want to say out here is do not let perfection become the enemy of good enough content. If you have good enough content, let's say you have 75% of the content, it's good enough for you to continue to work with it. If you're trying to wait until you create the perfect 100% of the content you need in order to get a job done, you may get to the point where by the time you get there, it's no longer useful to you. The third manifesto talks about collaborative authoring over editorial workflow. So rather than relying on what we call a strict editorial process that you have in place where content is managed through what I call the traditional command and control repository, why don't we loosen up the process a little more? Why don't we trust our employees and the staff within our organization to be able to generate the content and share it with them? So an example of that is using the wikis. Let's use the wikis so we can collaboratively author and create content rather than creating a strict editorial flow to do that. So the next slide, what I'm going to talk about is how are we using this Agile manifesto for knowledge management within our organization to collect what I call implicit knowledge across the different engagements that you do for our customers. So the first one was about individuals and relationships. So, it's a common saying that, knowledge transfer is more about people than about the tools. We hear it all the time. It's more like a self-evident assertion. And yet, when you walk into the organizations, the first thing the enterprise IT leaders do is, hey, here's a SharePoint. Go ahead and collaborate and share knowledge. They try to bring the tool in with the idea that somehow it'll work and solve everything together, rather it's about the people there. So in order to encourage the whole idea about people being able to generate knowledge, one of the things we did is we set up an expertise directory at SGT. And part of the expertise directory, we had chiefs, we had fellows at SGT, we had subject matter experts, and we had technical leads that we set up across the different engagements. The fellows and SMEs were really around identifying technical leaders within our organization at SGT. And they were available as resources for people who want to use them. They were also used for mentoring what you call high potential staff. And they were also used to provide seminars and talks within SGT around the areas of expertise to do that. So let me give an example of how the people come together quite often. So let's say we're trying to look at some future engagement out there, and we're trying to build a solution. So rather than just people just working, what we do is we identify people, we identify the technical leads for that solution we want to build, the subject matter experts, the fellows, and we actually get to them physically into one location. They come and sit there for a week, or sometimes more than a week. We are constantly interacting and communicating each other to build a solution. And once a solution is built, then it's put into a repository. But what we're doing in that process is we're capturing that implicit knowledge that exists in all these people's heads out there delivering the solution and be able to convert that into explicit knowledge. And we're doing something more than that. As part of bringing these people together, we're creating new networks of people who can exchange information with each other. We're increasing the social capital that is around those people. And when these people go back and become part of another community gets set up later on, they're taking the social capital and the networks in the first organization and moving into a second organization. As a result, expanding the networks of information that's available for us to be able to use them. The second one was about good enough content. So one of the things I realized very early on as I was talking to people and trying to capture, again, what I'm calling as implicit knowledge that exists in these people is they have an everyday job to do there. And providing this implicit knowledge is not part of the everyday workflow. So what I did not want to do is insert another tool into their flow, which did not even exist, that they could use in order to provide information that they were working with. The focus instead was, let you use the tools that you are comfortable with today. So if you want to use a Microsoft Word document, put it on SharePoint, go for it. If you're more familiar with trying to use Yammer as a way for share information, go for it. Use the tools and use the channels that you are comfortable with using and use that to share information. I may not get 100% of the knowledge, but I'll get enough so that it is valuable to me and is valuable to our organization. The second thing we did was we want to encourage this whole implicit. We provided a lot of physical travel between our programs there. For example, at Eros Data Center, where we were doing a lot of large-scale database work there. We had the folks go and meet with the folks at NASA Langley. We're trying to look at similar problems and how to solve them. And this whole physical meeting of together, coming to a day, resulted, again, implicit knowledge being generated, implicit knowledge being created, implicit knowledge being stored in the repositories that we use later on. The other thing we did was a lot of our programs had the lunch and learns, but they were very erratic in nature. Some of the programs did the lunch and learns, some of them did not. So we created at enterprise SGT-wide lunch and learn programs around the technical areas that we were interested in to do that. But part of the lunch and learn, I keep talking about this whole implicit knowledge about people meeting face-to-face. But with lunch and learn, it's not possible for everybody to get together in one location. So there we use online mechanisms to do that. So we use things like Microsoft Link, and we go to meetings in order to be able to set up these lunch and learns in specific IT areas that you could work with. So interesting enough, when we first started doing lunch and learns, and we wanted to capture all the knowledge that was being created during the lunch and learns, we used to do this audio conferencing and have people use the conference bridges. But because it was lunch and lunch, and this is something you guys can relate to, is when lunch is going on, people are opening up the potato chips bags and so on, and the audio was not as good in order to be able to capture it. So what I started doing was later on is I actually had this audio recorder that I ship around for every lunch and learn to every one of our offices there. So every month we have a lunch and learn. I'll actually ship them an audio recorder that sits along where the presenter is, and when they're done with the presentation, they ship it back to me, and then it's merged together and put up into a repository so other people can view it and use it. The other thing we did is we started doing interviews of the people there. So rather than just doing audios and lunch and learns, actually go and do video interviews of the people. It's another way for us to capture the implicit knowledge that existed within the folks. The third thing we did was, beyond the lunch and learn and the people going and meeting each other, is I still wanted additional implicit knowledge that I needed to capture from all the technical leads. And again, finding out that they really did not have the time. It was not part of the normal workflow to sit down and share with me the implicit knowledge that they had. So what I decided to do instead is use technical writers. I said, on a program, if you have a technical writer, I'll provide one. I will set up a 1-hour meeting with you, and I'll interview you the process. So the writers would go in, meet the technical leads on the different programs or on the areas we're interested in, and set up a meeting invite and meet for them for 1 hour. Do an interview with them, capture the knowledge, and then go back with the initial draft and say, did I capture it right? So that's the third way in which we're trying to capture implicit knowledge that was existing around the organizations to do that. The third thing I want to talk about is collaborative authoring. So here's an interesting article that I read about. So the study actually done by the scientific journal Nature. So, when I was growing up, I used to use the Encyclopedia Britannica a lot when I wanted to search for information. I mean, the World Wide Web as it exists today did not exist at that time. So I did this study in which they took 42 scientific-related articles and said, let's see the number of errors that exist in Encyclopedia Britannica, which is a style of strict editorial writing, and then look at the Wikipedia and see what the differences are. What are the errors between those two sources of data? So what they found out is that Wikipedia had on an average, 4 errors for a scientific article. When they look at Britannica Encyclopedia, it had 3 errors for every article that was written there, on an average to do that. So obviously it sounds like, Britannica should be a much better source of data than you look at versus the Wikipedia. But the difference is, with Wikipedia, in a production environment, for finding errors, I can go ahead and change it. With something like a Britannica encyclopedia, I have to wait for the next version of the release of the encyclopedia before the errors are going to be fixed there. So that's an example of where you can use collaborative authoring tools like Wikipedia. You can use it to update information and keep it constantly updated as you go along during the process. So at SGT, in order to create this more collaborative environment there, we actually result in creating what we Collaboration Center, or the Collaboration Innovation Center, which is really part of my next slide out here. So when we first started this, none of this existed out here. This was about 18 months ago. So before we created a physical center, we actually created a virtual center. Virtual centers where we captured all these lunch and learns, the audios, the videos, and stored them into, we created an Amazon environment where you had WordPress sites, Yammer, all of this set up, and we captured all that information. But again, my focus was implicit knowledge, and I wanted more face-to-face interactions with the people that we want to interact with. So we landed up also creating what you call a physical collaboration center. So the physical collaboration center exists for people to come in and collaborate, meet together, and have these face-to-face conversations. While the virtual centers, collaboration centers are more used by wikis and blogs and WordPress and other websites that we use in order to capture the implicit information. So now that we have these two sites, we have the physical center and the virtual center, we wanted to link the two together. And that resulted in what we call an interface app. So this interface app was really developed to bring the two pieces together. And part of this was at the physical centers that you have, the physical collaboration centers, we actually created kiosks out there. We're creating kiosks, I should say, out there that provide more like a tablet-based interface where I can use search capabilities to go across the different repositories of information we have there. So going back to what I said initially, our goal was not to create a single repository. Let people work with whatever tools they're comfortable with, so at least I can capture the knowledge that I want up there. And the result in a whole set of different kinds of repositories. We have process access libraries at the organization level, at the individual levels. We use wikis. We have VPCs with a Java-based program that we use for collecting information. We have SGT Inc. We have the innovation centers. A lot of different resources that are being there as part of it. And then for presentation support, we have a number of different tools that are available to you. We use Microsoft Link, GoToMeetings. We have video conferencing and Yammer that are used as part of it. So that is how our virtual and our physical centers are coming together through this interface app. It provides us essentially an interface for people to interact with both the physical center and the virtual center. So now, no presentation would be complete if I didn't talk about the challenges encountered to do that. I think to me, the biggest challenge in trying to capture this so-called implicit knowledge that exists within an organization was to really to get people motivated in order to do that. I remember at one of the sessions when I was talking to a person with an expertise in certain area, I said, hey, you sound very knowledgeable, you've done a lot of work in this area, why don't you share it with the rest of the folks at SGT so that they can learn about what you have done, and you should call you and ask you questions about what you did there and get more information. Her first response was, I don't want to put my name out there because all of a sudden I'll get in call and people will think I'm an expert. I mean, it's like, well, isn't that the point, that you want to be recognized? Well, in her case, she did not want to be recognized, right? But that's not true for a lot of people. A lot of people do want to be recognized, and that really is the motivating factor that we used to do that. By having your works published out there in different media, whether it's on a wiki or whether it's on a website, whether we do an interview with you and put it up on the main website, to do that, it gives you recognition. It allows you to grow in your career as part of that effort to do that. And that really has been a motivating factor, is to provide them recognition that they need in order to support other people in the organization. The next area was security, as we're trying to build a single search capability that goes across all the different data sources out there. We have to figure out how do we secure sensitive information that we have existing within an environment to do that, especially things like FOU or information out there. You have to make sure they're stored in the appropriate places so they're not accessible by non-US citizens and so on. So that was some of the things that we're still working on. Another one was ownership. Who actually owns all this data that we're creating out there? Right now within an organization, we have the chiefs. So SGT as an organization is focused on science, engineering, and IT, and we have chiefs around all the three different areas there, and they essentially are owners of the information. But going forward, you need to figure out other ways in which you can put the ownership and responsibility further down the chain into the actual other people creating the content within the organization. To me, the most challenging one has been metrics, right? That's the first thing my leader should ask me, okay, so we're doing all this knowledge management, we're capturing all this information, what are some of the metrics to show we've been very effective in the way we've been capturing the information out there? I don't have a good answer for that yet. That is something I still struggle with. What are the appropriate metrics for the kind of knowledge environment that I'm creating that I can have, I can show back to my leadership that it is working to do that. So finally, what are the takeaways from this whole process? One was that it's about the people. I mean, that's always been, especially in the case of me, where it's all about implicit knowledge, it's all about the people. How do we use those people to capture knowledge? It's not about creating a single repository tool and hoping that once you build it, they will come. You almost have to go to them, work with the people, with whatever tools they're familiar with, and let them work with it and use that to capture the knowledge that you want out there. The second thing was about good enough knowledge. Not only you want good enough knowledge, but you want knowledge, good enough knowledge that is provided frequently to you. You don't want information coming in once a year. You want more frequent updates of the knowledge that they're sharing with, that you want to come there. The third one goes back to use multiple channels to share information. I was listening to David, and he talked about the different ways we can, keeping the user in mind and the way they can visualize the data. So you need to provide different channels in which not only can you acquire the information, the knowledge that you want, but also be able to share that knowledge with the users who are going to be consuming the knowledge. So you have to keep that in mind too. The fourth one was about knowledge getting reused. For us, it's essentially the way knowledge we're capturing, we want to be able to reuse that knowledge. If you cannot reuse, there's no point in having it to do that. So again, that goes back to keeping the appropriate metrics in place. We can see which knowledge is getting reused and what's not getting reused, what can be archived and thrown away, or what has to be still kept there in the system. And finally is don't forget the users of the knowledge. I mean, you're generating knowledge so they can be used. So you have to keep them in mind. How are they going to visualize the knowledge? How are they going to be accessing the knowledge that you're providing to them? How are they reusing it, and what value they're getting out of the knowledge to do that? So these are all the slides that I had. Really wanted to share with you briefly about how we're using, creating more of an agile knowledge environment within the enterprise with a very specific reason of capturing implicit knowledge around, especially implicit technical knowledge that goes on around the programs. And with that, if you have any questions, I'm open to any questions you may have.
Great presentation. I did have a quick question. You were talking about metrics, and we struggle with that also. Have you, I know you couldn't really mention a whole lot, but have you thought of some that may be helpful? I know from our standpoint, being a government agency, it's hard, we can't use profit as a motivation.
Right.
But have you thought of other ways of doing it?
So we are a for-profit organization, so we are driven by profit. So the metrics we have, so example, my primary reason for capturing this knowledge was really for us to improve our business, right? To bring in more business to the organization. So some of the metrics we're planning on using is, as we look at the knowledge, how often is that knowledge being used in going after specific opportunities? So it really is capturing at the opportunities level, the value opportunities, whether win or loses opportunities, all those factor in as part of the metrics that we're going to be using. My sponsor essentially is business development because they need that knowledge and go after new business to do that. So the metrics are being driven for that reason by their needs to do it.
In terms of adapting the product, right, or the whole organization adopting it, did you face any challenges with people sharing knowledge openly because they feel threatened, and somehow their job is at risk and they're not as valuable because this is common knowledge now?
Yeah, that's very interesting you brought that up, because you're right. I mean, especially when you're talking about technical knowledge, is a lot more prevalent, where one technical person feels like if he shares his knowledge with the other ones out there, then his job, like you said, may be at risk. But I think since our focus was really on motivation for them is the fact that you get recognition, the fact that you get more opportunities to grow within the organization, and by providing initial examples how people have done that and have grown by sharing the knowledge, provide good examples for them to use to do that. So the fact that you share knowledge and becomes part of some business development, and if you win that contract, you get a nice bonus that comes out of it, that was a motivating factor. The fact that you provide that knowledge, it shows up in a performance review where you said you presented this information and all these people attended, that helps them with their pay raises, for example, or the performance review. So that became another motivating factor. So beyond the fact about job security, because that's the problem with implicit knowledge. One of the reasons why people don't share implicit knowledge is because of because they think by keeping it to themselves, it provides them job security, when in reality it does not. I mean, it prevents you from growing within an organization, because if you are the only one with that knowledge, you're not going to get promoted to something else, because the company feels like if I promote this person, I don't have anybody to do that. So showing to them, right, the opportunities for growth and so on, I think that's what helped us in motivating people to share the information.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank
All
you,
right,
Rohit.
thank you.